Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let's do this. But first, the business side of the house. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Allform. And if you've been listening to the show for a while, you have probably heard me talk about my Helix mattress. Not only do I have one, but my daughter has one. Well, Helix has left the bedroom and they've started making sofas. They just launched a new company called Allform, and they are already making the best sofas that I've ever seen. So what makes an Allform sofa really cool? Well, for one, it's the easiest way you can customize a sofa using premium materials and at a fraction of the cost from traditional stores. You can pick the fabric, spill, stain, and scratch resistant, the color of the legs, the sofa size, the shape, and make sure it's perfect for you and your home. Armchairs, love seats, all the way up to an 8-person sectional seat. So there's something for everybody. And you can always start small and buy more seats later on if you want your Allform sofa to grow and change when you move. Allform sofas are delivered directly to your home with fast, free shipping. In the past, if you wanted to order a sofa, it could take weeks or even months to arrive, and you need someone to come assemble it in your home. Allform takes just 3 to 7 days to arrive in the mail, and you can assemble it yourself in a few minutes. No tools needed. I have a sofa, a 4-person sectional. I picked it out online. The thing showed up. It was ridiculously easy to put together, and I love it. I stretch out on that thing all the time. Now, if getting a sofa without trying it in the store sounds a little bit risky to you, don't worry about it. You get 100 days to decide if you want to keep it. That's more than 3 months, and if you don't love it, they'll pick it up and give you a full refund. And they even offer a forever warranty, literally forever. To find your perfect sofa, check out allform.com/clearedhot. And Allform is offering 20% off all orders to the listeners. Allform.com/clearedhot. This episode is also brought to you by Babbel. And if you're like me, learning a second language in high school, it wasn't exactly the apex of my academic career. Now, thanks to Babbel, the #1 selling language learning app, there's an addictively fun and easy way to learn a new language. Whether you're going to be traveling abroad, connecting in a deeper way with family, or you just have some free time, Babbel teaches bite-sized language lessons that you're actually going to use in the real world. I had a trip to Costa Rica recently. I used it to brush up on my Spanish because I wanted to be able to say more than "Donde está la biblioteca?" 15-minute lessons make it the perfect way to learn a new language on the go. Unlike the infamous language classes you took in high school, Babbel designs their courses with the practical, real-world conversations in mind, things you're actually going to use in everyday life. Other language learning apps use AI for their lessons plan, but Babbel lessons were created by over 100 language experts. Their teaching method has been scientifically proven to be effective, 14 different languages to choose from, including Spanish, French, Italian, and German. Plus, Babbel's speech recognition technology helps you improve your pronunciation and accent. Where do you want to take your Babbel lesson? You can take it with you in the car, walking, or while you're doing your chores. It's up to you. Right now, when you purchase a 3-month Babbel subscription, you'll get an additional 3 months for free. That's 6 total months for the price of 3. Just go to Babbel.com and use the promo code ClearedHot. That is BABBEL.com, code ClearedHot for an extra 3 months free. Babbel, language for life. This episode is also brought to you by MD Hearing Aid. There is nothing worse than losing your hearing. Constantly having to turn the TV up, missing out on conversations, having to say what or huh over and over again. If that sounds like something you're struggling with, MD Hearing Aid is an FDA-approved digital hearing aid that costs a fraction of what typical hearing aids cost. The average price of hearing aid in America is over $2,400 a pair, but their Volt Plus model is just $299.99 each when you buy a pair. That's nearly 90% less. MD Hearing Aid was founded by an ENT surgeon who saw how many of his patients needed hearing aids but couldn't afford them. He made it his mission to develop a quality hearing aid that anyone could afford. Sleek design fits well. Nobody will even know you're wearing it. It's rechargeable with battery life that lasts up to 30 hours. And if you forget to take your hearing aids off in the shower, not to worry. The Volt Plus is waterproof in up to 3 feet of water. And you don't even need a prescription or a doctor's appointment. You can buy it directly from them with an audiologist and licensed hearing specialist available 7 days a week. You may ask yourself, how do they make it this affordable? Well, since about 95% of people who need a hearing aid only require a few settings, MD Hearing Aid simplified the need for certain components not needed by most people. MD Hearing Aid has brought affordable hearing to over 600,000 satisfied customers. They have an A+ Better Business Bureau rating and offer a 45-day risk-free trial with 100% money-back guarantee. You can buy with confidence. It is time to reclaim your life from hearing loss. Go to mdhearingaid.com and use the promo code ClearedHot to get their buy one, get one, $299.99 each offer. Plus, they are adding a free extra charging case at a $60 value just for listeners to Cleared Hot. So head to mdhearingaid.com and use the promo code ClearedHot, or you can even call them at 800-734-9524. That's 800-734-9524. This episode is also brought to you by the brand that may have added the most joy into my life recently. That is right, Magic Spoon. I loved cereal growing up, and I found out as I got into my 40s, I can't eat it anymore because, well, the things that are in there, they're not that great. And I have been trying to cut down on carbs and sugar and unhealthy food. So I thought my options were limited, but they're not, because Magic Spoon saved my ass. They have amazing flavors that I know you're going to love without all the bad stuff. They just released a brand new variety pack. It's now featuring peanut butter. Peanut butter was a limited edition flavor in 2021, sold out 3 times. It's gotten so much love, they decided to keep it permanent and add it to the bestseller variety pack, which also includes frosted fruity and cocoa. 0 sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, and only 4 net grams of carbs in each serving. Only 140 calories per serving. Keto-friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, low-carb, and GMO-free. What I'm going to recommend is that you mix and match cocoa and peanut butter. What? Yeah, it's going to taste exactly like what it sounds like. Amazing. Go to magicspoon.com/clearedhot and grab a variety pack and try it today. Be sure to use the promo code ClearedHot at checkout to save $5 off your order. They are so confident in their product. It's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee. If you don't like it for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to get your next delicious bowl of guilt-free cereal at magicspoon.com/clearedhot and use the code ClearedHot to save $5 off. Last but not least, this episode is brought to you by ExpressVPN. So have you ever browsed in incognito mode? It's probably not as incognito as you may think. And why would it be? Incognito mode, like the Chrome browser itself, is a Google product. And Google has made a fortune by tracking your movements online. There's even a $5 billion class action lawsuit against the company in California, where it's accused of secretly collecting user data. Google's defense, incognito does not mean invisible. So how do you make yourself as invisible as possible online? Well, ExpressVPN. Turns out that even in incognito mode, your online activity still gets tracked, and data brokers still get to buy and sell your data. One of these data points is your IP address. Data harvesters use your IP to uniquely identify you and your location, but with ExpressVPN, your connection gets rerouted through an encrypted server, and your IP address is masked. Best of all, ExpressVPN is super easy to use, no matter what device you're on, phone, laptop, or smart TV. All you have to do is tap one button for instant protection, and that's actually my favorite feature. I use it on my phone, I turn the app on, I pick where I want to show up from, and boom, I'm off and running. So if you really want to go incognito and protect your privacy, secure yourself with the #1 rated VPN, expressvpn.com/clearedhot, and get 3 extra months for free. That's expressvpn.com/clearedhot. expressvpn.com/clearedhot. And that's it. My guest today is a dear friend, Robb Wolf, who I met over 10 years ago, I think, at this point, when we were both on the CrossFit circuit, delivering lectures at CrossFit seminars. He is one of the smartest people that I know, and I couldn't be happier that him and his family have now relocated to the Flathead Valley. From a bio perspective, he is a former research biochemist and a 2 times New York Times Wall Street Journal best-selling author of The Paleo Solution and Wired to Eat. He's transformed the lives of hundreds of thousands of people around the world. With his knowledge, his books, his seminars, his podcast, he is an amazing wealth of knowledge. And like I said, I couldn't be happier that he and his family have landed nearby. We get to train jiu-jitsu together. I'm going to shut up and let Robb just go ahead and speak for Robb himself, because I would guarantee you mess up half the things that he's trying to say. Episode number 177 with Robb Wolf. Enjoy.
Okay, got the red smoke. Gun run, north and south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke. Okay, copy, west of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now. Come on with it, baby, give it to me, I need it. You're cleared hot. Copy, cleared hot.
It looks good.
Is there anything that matters more
Then syncing up?
than looking good? There's so many ways I could take that syncing up comment. I don't know if we want to start like that, though. We should save the opportunity to go deep like that.
We should. But there's some good material there.
I have to start today with a confession. I
enjoyed choking me for 18 minutes uninterrupted yesterday.
I ate popcorn last night, and I had jelly beans the day before that. I feel like when I'm talking with you, I have to open with where I've fallen short because I feel like I just...
This is what sucks about being the food guy. Like if I was a priest, I would only creep people out about sex every once in a while. But when you're the food guy, it's 3 times a day, every day. Like people see you coming and they cover their shopping cart with their kids. And
I would go down a different aisle if I ever saw you in the grocery store. You know, like we used to at the old nutrition talks, right? Stay to the outside of the grocery store, which is actually a good idea.
Reasonable, yeah.
That's not where you'd probably find me though. And I would say something along the lines of, well, my kid's like this. It's not my kids.
It's for me.
I do the best I can, Robb Wolf.
That's all you can do.
You set a standard that's impossible to maintain when it comes to food. And then somehow you make me feel guilty about eating it. Even when I haven't seen you in years, I'm like, God damn it, I've let Robb down again.
See, and I think that the standard that I set is set by somebody else. But when people actually figure out what I do, they're like, oh, you have some ice cream once in a while? And I do. And
I mean, that has to be the key, right? You have got to give yourself a little bit of relief. Otherwise, you just go insane, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, so I've kind of carved out my niche dealing with the super sick, broken, like they went everywhere else and nothing worked. And so I've got a crowd that, you know, whether they're gluten intolerant or whatever, or they're really carb intolerant, like that's just kind of their gig, and they make a decision. They're like, okay, I either feel like shit or I do this. And so for them, they've got really, really narrow lane lines.
It has to be drastic, right?
Yeah. For 98% of people, though, they've got a lot more latitude there.
The other day when we were warming up, I was also admitting to you, not just because we're on a podcast, am I going to admit to you what I eat. You can agree that the other day before class, I was like, Robb, I've eaten carbohydrates in the last 24 hours. You're like, yeah, dude, I drink mine. I'm like, oh, I appreciate that headspace. He is normal. Yeah, for me, I do so much better if I know that there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
And I can also, maybe just take it easy, just a touch. Maybe be easy on myself because I have you to be hard on me.
Well, I'm glad I can facilitate something there. I have some role other than sperm donor for my kids. So,
And also, I didn't choke you for 18 minutes yesterday. That's not the class that we were doing. We were doing Mount Top, which means half the class is Mount Bottom.
I still recall getting choked a lot. I don't know.
0 chokes. 0 chokes.
Maybe it was just asphyxiation. Maybe that's what it was.
What does it say about somebody when their favorite submission is pressure?
That they're playing a really good game of jiu-jitsu, that they're not fucking around and they're not trying to turn it into a Fred Astaire dance studio deal. So,
I think you have to have a certain level of body weight for it really to work, though. Like a 140-pound guy is not going to tap me to pressure.
No, not tap you, but like they will wear you the hell out if they know how to do it, and then eventually they might get something. Yeah.
It's been an interesting 2.5-year journey. The first 6 months were a lot of, why do my elbows hurt? Like we were talking about the other day. I'm grabbing too hard. No, I'm just being smashed on the bottom by every single person.
Right.
And I think maybe the only difference for me is I just kept a list of those people.
Arya Stark style.
I mean, I'll let them go at some point, generally when they quit on life.
Right.
Or I never see them again. But other than that, they're on the list. Some at a higher level than others. Some people, I think it was incidental. Others certainly was intentional. It's like, all right, one day I will have enough knowledge and experience that I will pay you back, you son of a bitch.
This explains the food angst and basically smashing me until I poop my pants. I think that was the only point where
I have not smashed you at all.
Okay.
We've had some good rolls. It's been great. I accidentally elbowed you in the face one day. That was not great. Shit happens. I was actually, though, I've been on the receiving end of some of those Whoppers, and like, quick check, teeth are all there, and carry on.
Yep. I was glad it was my nose and not my teeth. So, yeah.
I had never broken a bone until I started doing jiu-jitsu.
You broke something in here?
My nose.
Oh, you did? Okay.
And you know what sucks about that is it really only takes like a little tap now.
Once it
doesn't pour, but you feel it. You're like, son of a bitch. Here we go again.
Yeah.
And it wasn't actually a strike. It was a gi lapel over my nose, cranked. Now, obviously, I had a hand in this because I could have changed the outcome by tapping, maybe even turning my head. But instead, I figured I would get out of it by just pushing my face through the lapel collar. And until I heard a little, and then a little bleeding, and then for about 3 weeks, if I was like, just even a little bit of breath, blood.
That's a rough way to break your nose. I mean, diving for a single leg, getting a knee.
No, it wasn't
probably
that at all.
a lot nicer than
Somebody
scraping it off.
Somebody made me bleed my own blood with my own gi lapel.
And hence the beauty of jiu-jitsu.
God, it's been fascinating. It has been fascinating. As a scientist, and I think probably the smartest person that I know.
You need to broaden out your talent pool if that's the case.
From the world that you live in, you want to talk about interesting. How has this last year, what are we at now, 1.2 years into the pandemic? How has this been for you?
It's been interesting because being in this completely elective income health space, I was kind of like, oh, we're screwed. Like, I'm going to end up doing something else here. But interestingly, a confluence of social media going batshit crazy and just people savaging each other, and some cross-section of folks, people realizing that they need to improve their health. Like, I was listening to the John Boone Travis show when I was driving in, and like you guys were opening up with, hey, why didn't folks take an opportunity to get healthy? And we've got a chunk of people that they were like, early on, they figured out, if I'm healthier, I'll do better. And so this Healthy Rebellion community that we have, it grew remarkably over the last year. So it's been a weird deal for me. We're like, and super lucky, super grateful. Every single thing I'm involved with, whether it's investments or my direct business stuff, has grown over the last year. But I've seen so many people suffer so terribly. Businesses closed. I only know one person from high school who ended up dying from COVID, and she was a wonderful person, but she was a smoker and pretty overweight and a bunch of other comorbidities. And I know 4 people that have committed suicide. And these are people who had families, who had jobs, who had careers. They had a life, no health issues. And the one guy, it was just like the social isolation. Like he was this
could not take it.
He was still making money, still doing his stuff, but he was in sales, and like being disconnected from people and doing Zoom, he couldn't do it, and you look back and you're like, oh, what could I have done there? Like, could I have reached out one more time, or, whatever, a bunch of this stuff. But it's been interesting. So it's really weird because for me personally, the last year's been great. Like, we were in Texas for a chunk, and then we just moved here. We had a pool in our backyard. Texas was pretty opened up. We were okay. Like, our kids were okay. We homeschool, so there was no drama with that. Like, we were already in a pretty good groove with this, but it doesn't take far, looking outside my circle of friends, that I see some just horrific impacts on people.
I didn't realize the power as Homo sapiens of being connected to people.
Yeah.
And obviously, I think there's a spectrum of people who can do okay or maybe better with less. And I think I probably fall into that. Like, my sphere of people is pretty small, but I had no understanding of some of the struggles that people were having who needed more of that isolation. And I think that's, I mean, you want to talk about the loss of jobs in the economy and all that stuff, but Japan, I think, would be a good place. I was reading an article not too long ago. The number of suicides has exceeded the number of COVID deaths, I think, by an order of magnitude, which is like, holy shit. And I think a lot of that, I've done plenty of Zoom calls for the last year and a half. Anybody who says that you're connected because you're doing Zoom calls hasn't done enough.
Right.
Hasn't gotten to the point where you just do a cutout of yourself or a JPEG or like a GIF. So there's like a little bit of movement, and then just.
Or all that you've ever done is online porn versus actually sleeping with someone. It's like.
Okay, I hadn't connected those dots.
They are not the same.
But I like where your head's at on that. No, the suicide, the isolation. Talked to a buddy of mine recently whose kids are just now going back to school. The first day of school in San Diego was yesterday.
Wow.
And I was asking him about the kids because I'm curious, how do they feel about it? It wasn't nervousness. They didn't give a shit about the subjects that they were learning. They wanted to go see
and
their
just
friends.
play.
They wanted to be around other people. And I don't know. I'm not an expert on depression. I don't think I've ever suffered through depression. I've never been suicidal, but I think that those people that have gotten to that point, I don't think it's a water spigot on off when all this stuff opens back up. And I have probably countless times living where we live now, which, welcome to the Valley,
right?
By the way, welcome to the fucking show.
They
That's
let
what
us
the
in.
card should say. That's what the greeting card should say on the door. And I'm obligated to say you shouldn't move to Montana, people, because there's a lot of earthquakes and dinosaurs here. Montana residents require me to say
Grizzlies.
Grizzlies, they're 40-foot grizzlies. Mountain lions run through the streets. Summer only comes on one Wednesday. It's -40 every day. Other than that, people get pissed when you say come to Montana.
Right.
Like this podcast will all of a sudden change the world. But countless times, man, we were lucky to live here. Even just in a little I was traveling. I was in Park City 2 weeks ago. And, the mask thing, my issue isn't with the mask. It's more with the messaging, or I should say the lack of consistent messaging when it comes to it. Just before you came here, I scrolling through social media, and what did I see? People getting in fistfights in stores over masks. Legitimately, that's what I happened to encounter, and it went from a very casual exchange to a man getting coffee spiked on his head, which of course altered in a fistfight, and then people getting punched in grocery stores. And I mean, I don't think you can argue that masks probably help, but the messaging around it, I can almost understand why people at this point are so burnt out and exhausted, because it's been like this pendulum of back and forth.
Right.
And that's what I meant from like when I was asking about the interesting perspective. I mean, you're a scientist at heart. I'm sure you look at data. It has to have been at least slightly interesting to sit back and watch this shit show play itself out.
Yeah, and I mean, I've had to be really careful about what I do, because cancel culture has come knocking for me a couple of times, and so
really?
I will. Oh yeah, it's I've had to drop my head down a little bit and hunker in. But early in this thing, I started collecting as much of the information as I could in spreadsheets, and I'm on a couple of different academic committees where we talk about this stuff and share papers. And super early into this, people forget that there was this Crown Princess cruise ship where people had COVID. And this was an amazing natural experiment where we could see, okay, this contained environment, and we see what the spread is and what the comorbidities.
I remember this.
Nobody talks about it, because it, to a T, kind of described not everybody died, not even all the old people died, not even all the old diabetic people died, but a lot. But the people that did die tended to be older and diabetic.
Yeah.
It mapped almost perfectly what we've seen the whole rest of this story. But we stuffed and suppressed that information so quickly, it was kind of stupefying. And then super early in this whole thing, the one solution that we were dangled out there, the one carrot, was going to be this vaccine, which I'm not anti-vax. My kids have been vaccinated for other things, but up until they appear to have done a vaccine for a SARS-CoV virus. Prior to this, they had failed every single time. The experimental animals died due to the vaccines.
When they were attempting
this for both MERS and SARS-1.
Oh, interesting.
So from the technology perspective, you're like, we're batting zero on this, but this is the one solution we're being offered. There's a whole host of pharmaceuticals that could be used to mitigate this thing and improve treatment outcomes. And there's this whole crazy thing that if people lost weight and got more metabolically healthy, that there would be, a benefit there. None of that stuff was talked about. And it was if this thing was the existential threat that was being presented, that this thing could end civilization or humanity or whatever was being thrown out there.
Which, for clarity, that was, I don't know if they were using end of humanity, but the forecasting was not pretty at all. It was aggressive. It was catastrophic.
Yeah, it was aggressive. And I just think back to things like when we were fighting actual Nazis in World War II and we were developing the atomic bomb, the Manhattan Project had 4 different groups exploring different avenues for developing the bomb, because human beings had never developed an atomic weapon before. So we didn't, 1, know if it was possible, 2, what route was going to work, or if there were multiple routes, and you couldn't put all your eggs in one basket. So why did we put all of our eggs in the vaccine basket? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, just from a risk mitigation standpoint, if you go to any hack financial planner, they're not going to say, yeah, man, put every single dollar in the stock market, or put every single
Bitcoin or die, bitches.
It's like, you diversify your risk portfolio, and we did no diversification on that. That's fucking weird. Like,
why do you think that happened, and why do you think that information was suppressed about that cruise line?
Real speculation. I think more people knew more about what they didn't let on to the degree that they knew that this wasn't as big a deal as what they thought. And it was an incredibly politicized ploy to gain some political capital, to make a little bit of some inroads into controlling society more. Like these vaccine passports are getting kicked around. Thankfully, our governor just kicked that one out of the state of Montana. So, and other states are doing it, so you don't all have to rush here. But yeah, I really, in my gut, I think that people knew that this wasn't as bad as what they thought. Otherwise, if it really was the risk that they were portraying, we would have had a really diversified pool of ways that we were going after this. Like if this was really an existential threat, there's no way we would have focused on a singular solution, because again, just looking at what had been done with MERS and SARS-1, those vaccines had never worked. We have still not developed an effective vaccine for HIV. It is managed with pharmaceuticals, with antiretrovirals. So do you get what this is just this thing where it makes my head explode. There's no way that this makes sense just from...
Well, it starts leading down pathways where you have to determine whether or not you need to fashion a tinfoil hat. And I don't
It looks really good on you quickly, yeah.
And I don't like being the person looking in the mirror going, fuck, am I wearing a tinfoil hat right now? But at the same time, it's also hard to ignore a lot of what you're talking about. Again, I'm so far from being an expert on this. I have one experience with vaccines from my time in the military. Actually, maybe two, and you might know the answer to this. But for the first one was the anthrax vaccine, which was a series of shots that I don't... my buddy Jack Carr was on Rogan's podcast, I think yesterday. I was listening to it, and he was talking about it. He couldn't remember either whether or not it was mandatory for us to get, but I'm pretty sure that it was. Fortunately, hypothetically, we came from a community where when you went to the corpsman and said, yeah, that garbage can over there looks a lot like my arm, and sign here, we didn't, a lot of people didn't have that luxury. But I know some people who had some very, very adverse effects to that. And it's my understanding it was only a very narrow span of protection. When I start talking about things about anthrax, I don't know what I'm talking about as soon as I say the word anthrax, for clarity, where people know my understanding of this. But I do know people who had adverse reactions to that. And then smallpox, is that a vaccine as well?
It is.
Because I had, personally, it obviously didn't kill me, but my ex-wife was pregnant at the time. It was right before the Iraqi invasion in 2003. So I actually got the little pinpricks that felt like nothing as I was getting on a bus to get on an airplane to start the journey over to Saudi Arabia. By the time we hit Turkey, I'm sitting there like, Houston, we have a problem. By the time we got to Saudi Arabia, my lymph nodes and my neck, I'm not joking, the size of golf balls. Right. I thought I was going to die. Obviously, the fact we're sitting here, I just want you to know I didn't die.
You did
at the
not
end
die.
of the story. Holy shit. I think getting smallpox probably would have been worse, but those are my only two exposures to vaccines. One of them, I resoundingly said I am not taking this, and the other one I didn't really have a choice because if I wanted to go on that airplane, I was going to get it. But I can understand people's hesitation. I don't like the idea of being a guinea pig, and I'm also not anti-vax at all by any stretch of the imagination.
But there is a
But
risk.
I also don't believe a lot of shit that people say, especially when the bottom line is associated with it.
Yeah, and there is any medical procedure. If you go to get your teeth cleaned, there's some number of people that end up dying or having an adverse reaction to nitrous oxide. It's very, very low. Those risks are well studied. They're well mitigated. But this is another thing that just chaps my ass, where there are costs associated with anything that we do with this. Kids wearing masks is goofy on a lot of levels. One, they're not great transmitters unless you're in like a multi-generational family or, all these things. And kids are imprinting emotional, content to the facial features of the people around them. So having a bunch of kids, a generation of kids that 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, where they're not really going to see emotional affect on people's faces, like what is that going to do down the road? And maybe it's not catastrophic, but there is a cost there. And just being able to ask those questions, like, where do we draw these lines? What type of, risk mitigating strategies are we comfortable with? And at what cost? Like, it became and is still kind of impossible to have discussions around this stuff. And even the vaccine story, it's interesting, again, dealing with the folks that are most of my community. a lot of autoimmunity, a lot of gut issues. What emerged really early, and it was kind of interesting, with people with MS, rheumatoid arthritis, actually seemed to be navigating this whole thing reasonably well. And we were worried about that because they have kind of suppressed immune response. But the way that people die from COVID is from a cytokine storm. It's where their immune response gets enhanced, and they die from an overactive immune response. So
I did not know that.
It's thought that some of these folks with autoimmune disease, because they're somewhat immunocompromised, sometimes even on immunosuppressant drugs, that they were able to mount the immune response but not have it go overboard. So there was this whole cross-section of people that seemed to actually navigate COVID itself better than what we might have thought. But the vaccine appears to be particularly problematic for autoimmune conditions. So you've got this weird, cost-benefit analysis. And again, I don't know the answer. Nobody really knows the answer, but we're not having enough discussions around that. And more than anything else, if somebody's trying to figure this out and they think that they've got a concrete answer, they're full of shit. Like I just have more and more and more questions, and I've been studying this stuff for pretty hardcore for a year, and it boils down to your individual circumstance, what things you have going on, what health concerns. If you're overweight or have type 2 diabetes, the likelihood of the vaccine working as well for you is less likely. So you should probably spend 4 weeks and get healthier, eat better, do what you can, and then do the vaccine. And we're getting none of that out of our public health messaging, which I think is damaging people. And it starts creating this skepticism. So it's easy to put on the tinfoil hat and maybe go to places that are ridiculous, but we have a lot of places that are really amenable to reasonable tinfoil hat usage. Yeah. And then that just opens up a whole bunch more too.
It's like a tinfoil visor. You don't go all the way in. It's just a little bit.
A little bit.
Or like a tinfoil, just the little snapback is tinfoil.
That's very reasonable.
Or a patch.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting you bring up the kids. I am more worried about the cascading long-term effects than I am about the virus itself. And I say that I don't want anybody to die. I've talked pretty openly about my own personal experience with it. I had it in late November, went in and got tested, did the quarantine, all that. And I probably wouldn't have gotten tested had I not lost my sense of taste and smell, because I had heard that so much as a primary symptom. There was some body aches. And honestly, by the time the results came back, I was feeling better. I probably would have taken 3 to 4 days off of doing really anything and just rested. The loss of smell and taste, that wasn't interesting.
Yeah.
That changed my entire perspective on food.
Yeah.
Like I hate eating. And then
there's really no point to it.
Then. And then I got it back. I'm like, I can't eat enough. I'm like, what's going on here? Is this all in my head? How come when I couldn't taste, I wasn't hungry all the time, but now, God damn it, I can't eat enough food. But I worry about the impact. Again, if I could give everybody what I had and we could move on and not have cascading long-term effects on economy and the mentality of our civilization and the kids and all that stuff, I would. Again, I don't want anybody to die, obviously, but I am really concerned about how long it's going to take us to dig ourselves out of the trench that we have dug for ourselves.
Well, and just kind of the social divide. Like, I really worry about that, the degree of polarization that we have. Like, it sounds nuts. And again, tinfoil hat, visor, whatever thing. But man, I don't know if we've ever been in as divided a situation as a country since the Civil War, like prior to the first Civil War, and where could that go? Where could like the social unrest, nowhere good. Yeah.
I do on Fridays, I'll do the Q&A and the question came up today. I answered it today. This is Thursday. It'll come out tomorrow. And then this episode will be out on Monday, but it was about objective thinking. Critical thinking and objectivity and reasoning. And the person who was asking me the question, it was a technical background. They were an automation engineer. So their job is to go in and diagnose problems and critically look for them and look for solutions. And I was thinking about it. His question essentially was, what has happened to critical thought and objectivity in our world? And I'm thinking about it. I'm like, okay, well, your job demands that you have that. So somewhere along the way, you were taught that at a very systematic level. And I know for most people that once you bridge that gap and you see the value of critical thought and objectivity and reasoning, you apply it to every other aspect of your life because it makes sense. And I realized that the currency of what it seems like, and this is just me speaking my hypothesis, the currency of modern society is emotion, not logic. And the louder you can scream about the emotion that you have, it almost doesn't even matter if it's associated with hashtag facts, because then there's the fake news, the fake facts. I can't separate the wheat from the chaff on that, but it's almost as if we've lost the definition of what truth is. And I don't know how you recover from that. When you can look at somebody and say, this is the black and white data. Gun control is another example of this, where you can dive into the math and explain to people, one, any death with a firearm, wish there was none. But firearms exist, getting rid of them, that's a whole nother topic, like trying to get rid of over 300 million guns in this country. Pack a fucking lunch. Like, right. Good luck with that. So they exist. Let's talk about realistically, though, what these numbers actually mean, how they can be manipulated, strip away the suicide, which I'm not saying is gun violence, but that's an individual choosing to make that decision onto themselves and against themselves versus taking a weapon and using it against other people. And you show them raw data, or you make the best argument you can based off of raw data, and it's as if these are not the droids that you're looking for. And I don't know where you go from there, because if you escalate, if you have somebody who is leading with their emotions and they refuse to even consider logic or objective reality and fact, and then you decide to escalate with your own emotions beyond where they are, you're on a Jacob's ladder to hell.
Right.
I don't know how to get off that train.
Man, we may end up pressing delete on this one when we're all done.
No way.
I have some very dear friends that came here from Poland, end of the, pre-end of the Cold War, really gnarly personal story of extracting themselves out of an Eastern Bloc country, pretty horrific stories. And they make the point that, go read any Ayn Rand novel or 1984 and the Orwellian Newspeak, the 2 + 2 is 5. And this is this kind of cultural Marxism that just kind of marches in. And when you start getting to a spot where you can't have objective truth, and when objective truth is being mean or somehow like hurtful to people, it's crazyville. It's kind of like, okay, do your parents live in a house with electricity? Yes. Okay, then you want some objective truth, because you want 110 circuits and you want some 220 circuits. You want a certain amperage. You don't want made up math in that. You actually want electrical engineering to be the foundation for what's going on there. And we're at a spot.
Assuming you want to live.
Assuming you want to live. Assuming you want your parents or your grandparents or or
turn into fried chicken.
Yeah. And so there are some objective truths out there, but there have been, unfortunately, a lot of examples of where societies have gotten to the spot. I have a really dear friend that they escaped out of the Khmer Rouge, out of Cambodia, and it was the same thing. Like there was, it sounds trite in a way saying this, but there was a hate for the culture that was there and a desire to burn it down and then rebuild it in some fashion, and really nothing's ever perfect, but oftentimes iterating off of what you have is a lot better than just burning it down to the Stone Age and starting again.
Or trying to burn it down with no framework or idea of what you want to build it back to. Yeah. I hate this. It has to go. Okay, I hear you. What do you want to replace it with? What do you want to fix? If you have those answers, we can have a discussion.
Right.
If you don't,
and I might even help you. Yeah.
If you don't have them, though, what are we doing? What's the saying? Don't shit where you eat.
Right.
I mean, again, crass, obviously, but what's the difference between that and not, wanting to destroy something with no idea of what actually you want to replace it with, or no understanding of what would need to take place to actually create what you want to replace it with? I hide in the woods, Rob.
As do I. Interlocking grids of fire.
I hide in the woods.
And game cams and yeah.
And you know what sucks about that is it won't protect us, actually. It actually won't. It will delay how long it would take to get to us.
Right.
But it's not actually a protection. I lie to myself and say that it is, though.
It's better than where I've lived previously for that. It'll buy me a little buffer time. Yeah.
So where'd you go? My journey with you started, you were in Cali, right?
We were in Northern California initially, yeah.
Yep. That's where my sister went to college, actually. Some of her college time was at old UC Davis.
Yeah.
I visited once. I believe it smelled like manure in that area.
Absolutely does. They're a big ag school.
Yep. And then the last time I saw you before coming up here was Reno. Was that the move, Davis to Reno?
Yeah, so we were in Chico, then we went to Reno. We were there for 8 years, had 2 kids, really liked it, but it grew a lot. Like the kind of flight out of California, it grew a lot, it changed a lot, and I had always been curious about Texas. So we went down there and checked that out. Helped Michael Hines open up SBG Texas down there. He's doing great, really good stuff. The hill country of Texas is really cool, but I didn't appreciate the fact that I grew up around mountains and, 4 seasons and a legit winter and all that. And my kids wanted to murder me because although we did live through the snowpocalypse in Texas, which they both enjoyed and hated elements of it, but they're like, so wait, you're saying it snows here once every 30 years? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, yeah, it's not going to work. So all 3 of the girls basically wanted my head on a pike for moving them down there. So hence the move up this direction.
How'd you guys land on this area?
SBG.
It's not a bad reason.
I mean, it is like we looked and we were really trying to find other rural areas with an SBG gym, and there just wasn't. Most of them are pretty metropolitan in nature. And I even had in the back of my head, I'm like, do I want to open a gym? And I'm like, no, I don't. I've done that. Like, I've done the gym scene.
You've been down that path.
I've been down that path, and I will help anybody with what they're doing, but I will not be the person on the the placard again. So
we've both been down this path. There's a difference between what you think being a gym owner will be and being a gym owner.
Yeah.
Unless you have a full staff working underneath you, which it was me and my business partner. You're mopping.
Yep.
You're plunging the toilet. You're opening up. You're doing the programming, the consultations, all that. I owned a CrossFit gym, as you know, but for people listening who don't, my thought was, yeah, man, I'm going to have a place to work out. This is going to be awesome.
That's called your garage. And that's as far as it should ever go.
And I found that the longer I coached, the less I worked out.
Yeah.
Because my time was task saturated other places, and I'm also in that same place. My garage now is my gym.
Yep.
Invite only. No memberships.
Yeah.
And I added some mats to it. So it's awesome that you were looking for stuff proximal to SBG. I feel so lucky now. I think I've been a member now for like 2 3/4 years, probably somewhere between 2.5 and 3. But I had no idea that any of this existed when we landed in this valley, and literally dropped a pin north in Whitefish, southeast in Big Fork, south in Kalispell. Now there's out in Bozeman. I'm like, okay. Got a little lucky.
Yeah,
place
super
of landing.
lucky. Yeah, because I've had great coaching, but this is as good as anywhere that I've seen. And the gym itself is just so well run that there's lots of bodies. I mean, the other day at a noon class, we had 5 black belts on the mat and probably 15 brown belts, and I don't know how many purple belts.
He's got a crop of. I mean, obviously Travis knows far better than I the belting, but I'd assume if you got a stable of brown belts, that means in the future you'll have even more black belts. And
right.
He already recently, within 30 days, promoted 3 people to black belts.
Yeah.
It's a very top heavy mat, which is awesome.
Yeah. And it speaks. It's funny also, like for over 10 years, I've wanted to write some sort of a thing. When I was a kid, I'd go through the checkout line with my mom, and there was always like the National Enquirer, and I swear it feel like every 6 months
it's still there,
but there was like a title, article, circus fat lady has baby while sneezing or something. It's like, I didn't even know I was pregnant, and it's kind of like, it's totally ridiculous. But I've been in enough gyms where somebody has spent somewhere. Now, your time cycle on this will be different, but most people take 8 to 10 years to get to black belt, and
that's what I'm expecting for myself. Just FYI.
Well, we'll see. But folks act, particularly the people running the school, act like it's a surprise that this person who is invested. I see this stuff very similar to like blue belt, like an associate's or bachelor's degree. Brown belt, master's, black belt is like a PhD. I see it as a doctorate in combatives,
Yeah.
It is not a surprise to anybody in a graduate committee when somebody gets a PhD, because there's all this, communication like, oh, well, they invested 10 years of their life into this thing. People invest 10 years of their life into this, and then the person's a black belt, and they're like, okay, coach, so what am I up to? And they're like, well, you can't open another gym, and you can't do this, and you can't do that. And there's like, because they never developed systems, there was never this opportunity of like, hey, well, what type of capitalization do you have? And maybe we'll underwrite some of this, and we're going to show, share the business systems with you.
Yeah.
And we're going to help you find a spot where you can get this thing up and going. Or, no, I've got my day job. I'm totally squared away. I just want to help out around here. And that's totally good too. But nobody should ever arrive at a black belt and it should be a surprise, or there should be drama around the fact that the person is committed 10 years of their life to doing this thing. And they might actually want to do that as part of like their career. Like, there should have been all kinds of communication and other things going on prior to that. And that's another element of just the SBG family writ large. It seems like because of the internal business systems, a lot of that stuff just gets hashed out along the way. And there's actually some opportunity to do something with it. It's again, really analogous to like the poorly run CrossFit gyms where.
So I was actually, as you were talking, thinking in my head a way to describe that without saying the word CrossFit. I was going to say, we both know of a strength and conditioning company that I think could have benefited from an infusion of the structure that you're talking about.
And funny enough, everybody that tried to infuse that structuring got chased out, which is all kinds of interesting. But
they're generally doing very well on their own with the structure. They created the structure, again, my opinion, that I think that they thought was missing. I can't speak for them, but in the people that I do know, that seems to be obviously a summation of many things they've said to me. It seems like what they've done. They built what they saw as the deficiency, and most of them, I mean, I'm actually struggling to think of, I'm sure there are a couple out there who have not done well, but most of them are thriving. They're not just surviving, they're thriving.
Right.
Another benefit of having Travis as a coach is all these seminars flow through here. So the travel budget is $0.
Yeah. We may do Henry and Costa Rica at some point because it's Costa Rica, but yeah.
Having done it, I highly recommend it.
Yeah.
It was actually a great setup. I am not a fan of humidity or heat, so therefore I was pretty much uncomfortable the entire time, nor am I used to the feeling of profusely sweating while putting the gi on. I'm used to sweat. It's like, wow, if this is my starting point, we're going to need an extra mop for these mats.
Right.
But it was great. We did a couple hours a day and then go out and check out the – it was phenomenal. But – yeah, it's cool, man. I'm glad to see you guys moving up here. When you were texting me, and I'm like, yes.
Well, and it's funny because I had skirted this direction before we went to Texas, and we were kind of sniffing it out. But
that's right. You did text me before you guys went down.
And I was just really intrigued by Texas, though. And this is kind of a funny aside. Like, I was still doing a lot of travel with my work, and being in New Braunfels, like it was 35, 40 minutes to San Antonio, 35, 40 minutes to Austin. I had two major airports, central time zone, so I could go East Coast or West Coast or international really easily. And now I just don't know if I want to travel at all anymore. So it may be a deal where it's like, okay, 3 times a year, we're going to do something here, and y'all can come here and do it. Yeah.
It was one of the biggest realizations for me, the forced slowdown, was how little I enjoy the pace that I was working at and how little I realized the impact that it had on me. I often find that people who, if they haven't traveled for business, and if you only travel for pleasure, you will have a different experience than traveling for business. I had been on the road a long time, for a lot of years, and hate hotels, hate rental cars, hate sitting in airports, but would consistently do it once a week, twice a week, 6 times a month, 8 times a month.
Right.
Maybe we're going international. Maybe I don't even know what time zone I am in. I'm sure you've had the experience. You wake up in a hotel room and you play the game of where am I?
Yes.
Like what state am I actually in or city?
Yeah.
I hated it. I don't ever want it to go back there. And it forced me to realize again, or I guess reaffirm that, focus on the things that you actually can control, not the ones that you can't. Like build a podcast studio.
Right.
Double down on what it is that I enjoy doing and find to be enriching for myself. No control over what happens to me, 100% control over how I receive it. And I'm going to do everything I can. Actually, I'll go a step beyond that. I'm never going back to that level of travel. I didn't realize how exhausted I was from it. I hated it.
Just the time zone disruption alone is huge, and I mean, with your previous work, you had 2 lifetimes of that already, and so then we
also had chemicals to help us, which I'm sure are super healthy. We had downers and uppers. We could manage the whole thing.
ProVigil's pretty cool. It's got some really laudable characteristics to it. But
you ever tried it?
Oh yeah, yeah. I get some from a Canadian pharmacy, and it's interesting in that, like, if you have that disordered sleep or the time zone shift, it's a get out of jail free card for one day.
Yeah.
Like you can function that day, and then if you get in the rack, you get your sleep, you wake up the next day and you're like, I'm good to go. And there's not the lingering after effects. You just can't do it serially. It's not a 5 days, day in, day out deal.
That's not how the
generally
community of people that I used to work with roll. We'd go 2 bowls,
Shocker.
both unmonitored. Well, monitored in the respect that if they started to look empty, they would be refilled. But evening time, we'll just take the Ambien. Maybe 2. I knew people who got to the point they would take 2, unwrap 2 from the wrapper, put it next to their bed with a glass of water, so when they woke up in the middle of the night, they could down those
do
as
another
well.
one.
It wasn't addiction, though. It's because they wanted to. And then
they could stop anytime. They just wouldn't sleep for a month.
Yeah, they just didn't want to. And then in the morning, I forget the stay awakes they gave us. There was Provigil at one time, but it'd be like, I'll have an Italian espresso out of this Nescafe machine and one of these, and then hit the gym. It's like, God damn, man. Do you need both of those? Maybe leave the pill in there. And yeah, let's just say the usages exceeded probably 5 days.
Right. It went beyond the label recommendations. Yeah.
For me, I'm glad that I didn't enjoy the upper. It made me feel like my hair was on fire, and charging like a mounted 50-gun machine gun position would be a good idea. But then it felt like I was somehow it swallowed a blender, and like my liver and intestines and got into that. And so it just wasn't worth it. Like I had this moment of, I feel like I need to ride a dragon into battle. And then I will be in the bathroom for the next 12 to 36 days.
Right.
So for me, that was a self-regulation. It was nice, and I appreciated that. There were some people who went a little bit crazy. I know people who moved cross-country without sleeping in like 72-hour time periods.
It's efficient, but there's a lot. Might be taking some off the back end. Yeah.
For sure. The lifespan might be shortened by a decade or 2.
Yeah. So it's interesting, though, just the similarities on the work stuff. Like I've had some cool offers as things start opening back up. I like it so much here. I'm just getting my feet back into jiu-jitsu with a lot, because we were looking to move for 8 months, so it's just a rope-a-dope with that. And I'm like, I don't want to go anywhere. Like I told Nikki, I'm like, next time we leave, it's going to be like the whole family, and we may drive to Costa Rica. I don't know. So we'll see how it goes.
That actually would be very interesting.
Pan American Highway. We've done it. I've done it before, and doing it with kids, I don't know.
You can always go halfway and turn around. That's the beauty of a car versus an airplane. I guess you could turn around an airplane too, but you're probably going to go to jail.
I'd be turning around in Honduras though, so I don't know if that's really the goal or the smart thing.
My favorite flights are flights home. And I had the realization, if my favorite thing to do is come back here, maybe I should just leave it less.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I have, tell me about the Healthy Rebellion, which, by the way, I love the name of what you got going on.
Oh, thanks.
Because you changed it. It wasn't always that. You had a show going that was hosted on iTunes for a while, right? Did you hop off that platform completely?
No, I mean, it's still kind of on everything. It was the Paleo solution that ran for 10 years, and, the couple of different things with that. So, I mean, the whole Paleo moniker just became a problem. A lot of people were like, oh, I already get that and I don't do it. People would say, I would never do Paleo, but I've done Whole30 for the last 6 years, and you're like, oh my God. But that moniker had just kind of gotten old. And then interestingly, like I was arguably one of the first people in this kind of big tech cancel scene. It was about 3 years ago now that we got up one day, and I had text messages from Chris Kresser and Mark Sisson, and they were like, hey, have you checked your website stats? I'm like, no. And I looked in, and it was like our site traffic had just fallen off a cliff. Like it was 97% less. Yeah, it just disappeared. And I had hundreds of articles, interviews, different things, reviews of movies like What the Health, like some of the vegan documentary movies where I literally go second by second. Here's what the person said. Here's what the paper they claim. Here's my take on it. Some really highly linked and well curated stuff. Pretty high traffic website, and it just disappeared. And all of our Facebook presence, the ability to sell things like the Keto Masterclass that I had, just disappeared.
Like nobody. When you say they disappeared, did they shut the actual platform down? Or
Nobody could find it.
So essentially, I mean, really, what's the difference between those two?
Yeah.
If you typed it in directly and searched for it, would you still not be able to find it?
You would have to do Robb Wolf, What the Health. So as an example, there's this vegan documentary film, What the Health, and there was a pretty long period of time where if you put in What the Health, you would get the main movie, as the first link, and then maybe one or two other links. And then my review was there on the front page. And I had dozens, if not hundreds, of things like this. But what had happened, Google did this thing, I believe it was called the OWL update. And a good number of kind of low-carb ancestral health websites just took haircuts. And what's interesting with that is that it was a mix. There were some anti-vax websites that took a haircut. There were some people more like me that took a massive haircut. So there were some people that a lot of the material that they put forward is pretty questionable. Like I'll admit, it's questionable stuff. I wouldn't advocate for it. I don't agree with it. And then there was stuff like mine, which plenty of people out there would be like, oh, he's a pseudoscientist. He should be shut down or what have you. But it was interesting when your work is significant enough that both Google and Facebook take an interest in it, and your stuff just kind of becomes unsellable. And I wasn't really sure what we were going to do. It's like, okay, is this the end of the road? Because what else do you do if you can't get organic search and you can't do this and you can't do that? What do? We did still have a big email list, and I had contemplated a membership site before, but it was kind of interesting timing where social media was getting more and more toxic. Like more and more people were making noise about like, man, I don't want to be on here. It was pre-COVID, so, we didn't have that as a goose, but I still had the sense that people wanted some community. They want to do like nutrition resets and strength resets and talk about nerdy stuff. So we spun up this idea around the Healthy Rebellion, and it's there's an Albert Camus quote, and I'm going to absolutely butcher it, but it's something like, the only way to respond to an unfree world is to live so free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. And so I tweaked it to the only way to deal with an unhealthy world is to be so healthy that your very existence is an act of rebellion. So that's where the whole concept came from. And we launched it the year, 2019, and it did pretty well. Like we had good buy-in with it, and then COVID hit, and it really
people were
traction.
looking for some information for sure.
Yeah.
Were you able to get confirmation of any kind, like what happened on the back end or why?
So other people did the analysis, like some kind of computer geeks, and they did write-ups. They're like, these are all the websites that took a haircut, and my website was listed in that. And again, gets into tinfoil hat stuff a little bit, but when you look at, so on the anti-vax side, you could make the argument that people recommending not to get vaccinated, one, may be a public health concern because there's probably, like, we should probably still get it, polio and different things like that. But this is also one of the major revenue streams from most of Big Pharma. Like drug development is a very onerous, slow process. Most of the drugs don't make it through the pipeline. Most of them don't show efficacy. They're not that profitable at the end of the day. But the vaccine thing is pretty profitable. And so those folks are kind of dangerous. And even though I feel like as under the radar is this kind of ancestral health, low carb space is, I really do think that we get it pretty right. Like for if you kind of take the basic template out of this, sleep better, eat at a glycemic load that works for you, get some good movement, have community. You're going to need a doctor for like a broken arm or something, but literally nothing else. And so several years ago, and I forget which direction this was, but Google and GlaxoSmithKline had an exchange of like $680 million. I forget which direction it went, but there was a case to be made. People like Forbes and some other outlets made the case that you could now call Google a pharmaceutical company. And so anything that would be antagonistic to the message that they have. And then there's also just this greater story around climate change and cows and meat and methane. So I've been talking about that stuff a lot. So there were kind of the low carb thing was...
You had been talking about it at the time you
had been talking about it. My book and film had not been released yet, but we had been talking about that stuff. So I'd definitely been making noise around, hey, I don't know that we really can look at biogenic methane sources the same way that we do as what's coming out of the tailpipe of a car. And it's really controversial to say that.
I feel like that's science term for cow farts.
It is science term for cow farts and termite farts and shellfish farts, and like anything that lives is a greenhouse gas emitter until it dies, and even then it emits greenhouse gases until it rots away, and it's all part of a cycle. And I think that it's really misguided to lump that in with the same stuff that we get from transportation. But there are a lot of media outlets that don't like that. There's a lot of folks on social media that don't like that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like this is something that we need to have a discussion around. So there were kind of multiple angles that I could see where I could run afoul of big tech and everything. And we see lots more of this now, but I just happen to draw the short straw or the long straw, depending on how you look at it. Like this happened to me very, very early. So even if folks check out like kind of the landing page for the Healthy Rebellion, and I described this whole story, that people need somewhere else to go to be able to hopefully get some credible health information. It's not that we have all the answers, but we'll at least ask all the questions, and keep working to dig things up. I have personally, I don't know. I hear a lot of people talking about shadow banning or a decrease in their metrics. Sometimes what I want to say to the people is like, hey, your stuff actually sucks, so people are getting tired of it. But I don't have any data, and honestly, I have no right to say that to the people, because live a life how you want to, put out the information you want. It's interesting to talk to you because you had that objective look at it, the data. A guy like Mike Glover is an example. Mm-hmm. He's actually coming next week to be back on the podcast. He was really struggling. He was getting bounced around. Mm-hmm. They shut down his ability to do transactions. Right. Which, holy shit, if you need that money to turn your lights on and off, which probably is why you have the ability to do transactions in the first place. Right. It gets very gray, and I don't like this place where certain conversations or discussions are not allowed. Right. Like as you're explaining this, saying, hey, these organizations or entities, they may not like these discussions. I just don't like a place where, why can't we talk about everything? We don't have to advocate for everything, but maybe we should at least be able to have an economy of ideas where it's all out in the open. Because the worst ideas that I've ever encountered are from fuckwits who are hiding in the shadows, putting their stuff together, and then it comes into the light, and you're like, oh, that's terrible. That's really, really bad. Right. And again, but I don't know how to fix that either, because I also play the podcast as an example. I host it on Libsyn. If they were to shut that down, I would be okay because I could host it somewhere else. But if that domino train continued, well, shit. What do you do? Right. I sell T-shirts for the podcast on Shopify. They could turn it off at any given time, and it's I don't know. I appreciate their platform. I think I don't find myself to be very controversial. I will say what's at the top of my head, as you've probably experienced many times when I was publicly speaking at CrossFit seminars. Not always appropriate. I generally will apologize for it. But I don't often think or change what it is that I am going to say, but I can't say that I'm invisible to that guillotine. And maybe it's an inch above your head, or maybe it's 100 miles above your head. But as soon as your livelihood becomes tied to it, you're in an interesting spot. Yeah, you really are. Yeah. And how do you get out of that? Again, it's like, this is like the how do you get out of that podcast? Like, I think that offline, we'll talk about this offline. There are some solutions brewing out there around circumventing some of this stuff. Like, that's about as far down that as I'll go. But this is maybe a good example, or maybe just something that we really should have the discussions, like all of the discussions. For 30 or 40 years in medicine, it was assumed that peptic ulcers were a result of stress. And like you get a peptic ulcer, you go to your doctor, he's like, oh, you need to relax more, don't work so much, whatever. I know what an ulcer is. What's a peptic ulcer? Just standard stomach ulcer, yeah. And damn you and your terms. Sorry. Trying to be specific. Yeah, sorry. So then this crazy researcher was like, I don't know if this is really the case. And I forget how he stumbled onto this, but he actually did a swab of an ulcer, and he found this weird bacteria called H. pylori, Helicobacter pylori. And he said, I think that peptic ulcers are caused by this H. pylori infection. The scientific community just roasted this guy, ate him alive. Now, scientists, you could say, well, we don't have a lot of data to really. What you should do is say, We don't have great data to support that. How would you propose, fleshing this out? Which this is kind of like this old Koch's postulate, the guy that kind of began the whole germ theory of infection, where you have an organism, you isolate it from one thing, you're able to culture it on a dish, and then you can kill it and you move it around. Like there's a way of showing this stuff. What he did is he had himself scanned for an ulcer. He was clear. He inoculated himself with H. pylori, developed an ulcer, and that was medically documented. Then he went through a round of antibiotics. H. pylori disappears, as did the ulcer, and now it's heir apparent that H. pylori is probably the main causative factor for peptic ulcers. And medicine is just fucking thick with this stuff, where the dominant theory had been established for 30 years, 40 years, whatever. And then it gets completely upended, and it's one kind of upstart. Now, the medicine is also full of ideas that were wrong. But if we reach a spot where we no longer discuss what these things are, literally development stops. Like we have hit a cul-de-sac. You guys used the cul-de-sac analogy in the John Boone show, the culture hits a cul-de-sac, and that's it. That's as far as we go. We get no more advancement, because if you can't ask a question, can't explore it, can't prove or disprove the merits of it, you are done as a society. And China's not doing this. Russia's not doing this. India's not doing this. Like nobody else on the planet is playing these games. And we have some good inertia because of the history that we've had of innovation and kind of free thought and whatnot. But it won't, that inertia does, like, it's kind of like the car is in neutral, but we've got kind of a steep slope and we're slowing down.
Hope we got enough to get us over the crest.
And maybe for people that are a little bit like, I don't know about this guy again, was he really canceled or whatever? But if we just can't get to a spot where we can have, I think it's so much better to have a free exchange of insane ideas, and then we can publicly, respectfully shut those down. It's like, no, this doesn't make sense, and here's why. That seems really preferable to a 24-year-old tech geek who's like, I don't like paleo diets. Like this guy needs to just take a hike, so some post around biogenic methane or low carb diets being beneficial for type 2 diabetes, that stuff just disappears, which is something that's occurring now.
I forget who I was having this conversation with. I think it was a Jack Carr, Bud's classmate of mine. And, I think he posed the question, just give me an example of any time in history where the people who want to suppress information are on the side of the good guy.
Right.
I cannot think of an example of that. I love engaging people on idiotic ideas. And by that, I mean people challenging me on my stupid ideas, right, which most of them are. And I don't claim to be a genius. Actually, I'm very honest about the fact I'm an idiot. But I just don't like the stuff in the shadows. I think our world would be so much better if we could get past our own bullshit and just honestly have conversations, which doesn't mean that you have to agree. And I don't see how that's lost. And people are like, no, I don't want to do that. So it's the emotions or these leaders, and that's the currency of the day. And we're right back to, what the fuck do we get out of this?
Right.
I have no answers. I'm hiding in the woods.
I have some friends who are physicians, and a couple of them were pretty fired up maybe 2 years ago about some of the canceling that was happening. Like there are some actual MDs online that do some pretty sketchy stuff, and then there's a lot of chiros and different things. Like there's sketchy stuff. There's hyperbolic claims and just outright bullshit and everything. And that's unfortunate, but I still feel like it's a better place to have that out there. And then part of my job, part of these other people's jobs are to provide value in trying to sift through that. And it's like, no, this isn't the case. And here's a way that you could test it in your own, life and whatnot. But these guys were like, no. Like somebody needs to shut these guys down. This is dangerous. And 2 years downrange, these guys have gotten shut down because the creep reaches a point where it will affect you. Like it's this circular firing squad where it's
Not
some...
me, bro. I'm a nihilist. I don't believe in anything, so nobody can come for me, except for those who want to go after people who believe in nothing.
Then you may be at the very center of that circle, and you may be the one person left looking around like, okay, I made it, you know?
I've survived, and now I'm by myself. And then shit, we're back to this social isolation.
And then you're back to
thing.
social isolation.
Like I said, I do okay with a smaller group, but I still, you know, like I want to see my fellow Homo sapiens around.
Somebody to do jits with, yeah.
You can't. Well, I guess you could simulate murder by yourself, but that seems like a very slicey razor blade. You better be careful.
Right.
Fuck. Man, it's. I'm sure you spend time wondering about the world your kids will inherit, because it's all I can think about often, and I want, you know, I have conversations with them about critical thinking and objectivity, and about how emotions are better as followers than leaders, and working your way through this. And I have concerns.
Yeah.
I have concerns, and I have more questions than answers. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a smart enough guy to figure out what the solutions are, but I hope there are people smarter like you who are out there trying to make a difference, because that's not my role in this.
That's a lot of pressure for me. I hope there's much smarter people than myself. You know, some people like Brett Weinstein, like the Dark Horse podcast.
Yep.
Rogan does some great stuff. Like I think just providing any venue for just having a discussion around this stuff, and really hammering on that need to have an exchange of ideas and keep that stuff going. And I do have faith in kind of the scientific process that if something's just bullshit, if we keep beating on it, this is possibly interesting. Maybe it's Geekville, but when you look at the way that Romans built bridges, it's like concrete and rebar and arches. It's not that much different than what we do today. Like, there was a lot of stuff that was figured out there. So there are some areas of science where we get things pretty buttoned up, and like engineering, this stuff has been really pressure tested, really vetted. It's like concrete and rebar are great for building bridges. Balsa wood, not so much, you know. And then you get into biological scenarios like nutrition or health, you know, more broadly. There's a lot more variation there. There's a lot more stuff that needs to get figured out. But we really can't get to that if we draw some boundaries around it and we just say, this is it. The science is settled. We're done. Like, our lives will not be as good. We won't innovate the way that we could. We won't have jobs. We won't have just interesting lives, you know, doing something different. So
imagine if when dial-up internet came out, people were like, this is it.
This is as good as it'll get.
Or the first PC of any kind.
Right.
That had the equivalent computing power of a coffee pot at this point. Right. And people are like, this is it. I mean, that's where that headspace, I mean, that's where we would still be if that headspace was adapted or adopted. Back to things that people can control.
Yes.
Rob.
Yeah.
When they hit you up at the Healthy Rebellion, where do you start people? Because I've said this very often in the time of the pandemic. I really wish that when we make our way through this, which we will, and who knows what the normal will look like, that the emphasis on COVID is swung directly back onto the individual.
Right.
And we focus on health and wellness. What you may actually know this. What are the current stats for obesity in the United States from a percentage perspective?
I forget, but it's high, and it just keeps going up. Like, one thing I am aware of, 60 to 70% of Americans are thought to be insulin resistant. Not everybody ends up developing obesity as a consequence of insulin resistance, but when you get to that insulin resistant state, a ton of different cancers increase, cardiovascular disease risk increases, neurodegenerative disease increases, susceptibility to infectious disease increases. So it's really bad.
We got room for improvement.
There's nowhere to go but up. Yeah, we could do almost anything and do better than what we're doing now.
A lot of people, though, will say, and I know this because they have said it to me, I don't know where to go. So when people come to you, where do you start them? Because, I mean, obviously everybody is different. And I think we were joking about it before class the other day. I'm like, Rob, why can't you just give a dietary recommendation that works for everybody? That's what a lot of people seem to do. And the answer is, of course, because it doesn't work like that. But, I mean,
there are two that work for everybody. There's two things. Don't consume any liquid calories. Like, you know, and some booze. Okay, we'll negotiate on that. But sodas, frappuccinos, like, just do diet soda. If you're going to do the 32-ounce Frappuccino, do the skinny one that's artificial sweeteners. I know people are going to, oh my God, artificial sweeteners are going to kill you. It's not going to kill you.
You're saying it's better than the alternative.
It's so much better than the alternative, like so much better. It's not even on the same planet, you know? And so the liquid calories story is just so damaging. It's so easy to overconsume calories. It bypasses the neuroregulation of appetite, like our brain's ability to tell us when we're full. We've never, other than when we're babies, we've never evolutionarily consumed significant calories in liquid form.
So would you say avoid like meal replacement shakes as well too? Like any type of calorie? Are we talking about sugary?
More like sugary beverages, okay. Yeah. And even on the shake side, I find that when people, this is the crazy thing, if they eat and chew real food, they do better. And it's very rare that I find people really need like a recovery shake. If they just do food, 9 times out of 10, that's going to work for them. And what I find is a lot of people kind of struggle with body composition. And if you are doing shakes and it's working for you, great. Like I'm dealing with the population of people that they tend to overeat, they've got GI problems, and just like eating whole real food seems to work for them.
Liquid calories do not stick well with me.
Yeah.
In a pinch before, many times. I mean, I've done this experiment on myself enough times that I'm an expert at it. You know, protein shake, fill in the blank, it crunch before something physical, and I can feel it coming about halfway before I'm done. Like, and if I had eaten it that same window, which I just didn't have access to it, I would have been fine for that activity. Halfway through, it ain't going my way.
Yeah. And it's interesting.
So, almost every time. And I've just come to the place where, you know, I'll do a smoothie in the morning sometimes with protein powder in it. I'll throw like Athletic Greens. They're a sponsor of the podcast. I'll throw them in there. It's just like I'm going to get as much micro fill in the blank that I can, but I'll eat a little bit with it because just that pure liquid consumption for me, it doesn't do it. And it puts me in, I'm like, it like starts shaking. I'm like, oh no, the blood sugar is just.
Yeah, and that's almost everybody. Like, again, you have some outliers, you have some physique competitors that are already kind of genetically gifted or they're really super tight on their nutrition. But for like so there's an outfit called the Manhattan Institute, and it did an analysis on where we are going with healthcare. And so on the one hand is Social Security, the other one is Medicare. Basically, like there's no way to get out of the trap that we're in with that. Like we're so underfunded in these things, and it's because of the healthcare costs. And people will say, "Oh, we need socialized healthcare. We need this. We need that." Europe's in the same pickle. Like all Western societies are getting so sick so fast that the healthcare costs are growing exponentially, and even a drug cartel doesn't have exponential growth in their profits. So at some point, it's going to undermine everything. So we have to figure out something at like a population level that's going to work for people. And I'm really nervous about like taxing things because we tax soda today and then tomorrow it's butter and ribeye steaks, you know, because...
How dare you, Mr. Wolf?
I know.
You recommend taxing butter and ribeye steaks. Two of my favorite. Also, they pair great together.
They do pair great together, yes. But it's a slippery slope, so I'm nervous about that stuff. And, you know, if people remove liquid calories and they just eat more protein, and almost no one that we encounter, like they'll do our resets, and they've read my books, they've gone to seminars, and then when we actually have them weigh and measure their food for like 3 days, they're 25, 50% shy of what we want them eating protein-wise. And I think a good window is a gram of protein per pound of lean body mass all the way up to a gram of protein per pound of body weight. Like that's a great bracket to live within. And if you're significantly below that, you will overeat whatever else it is you're doing, whether you're high carb or low carb or vegan or what have you. There's a term called out of the neuroregulation of appetite, it's called the protein leverage hypothesis. And it puts this idea forward that all organisms eat to a protein minimum. Most protein foods are really nutritious. So if your body recognizes that you've got enough protein, you probably got enough nutrition, vitamins, minerals, all the rest of that stuff. So if you're deficient in protein, you will continue eating other food. And this is, you know, if there were two things that I think are within everyone's grasp, remove the liquid calories and then make sure that breakfast, lunch, dinner, get a palm and a half, or 2 palm size of dense protein source. And then if you feel like you run better on carbs, eat some carbs. If you feel like you run better on fat, tinker with some fat. Like that's where we start getting into the outer boundaries of kind of fine tuning.
Yeah.
But if people aren't doing those two things, like if they're still consuming significant liquid calories, if they're not eating a legit whack of protein at every single meal, they will struggle. And this is still like my old guard paleo, nerds, they thought that they were eating enough protein. Then we get in and really scrutinize what they're doing, and they're not.
It almost sounds like a rod of uranium in a nuclear reactor. Like if you don't have enough in there, it's just not going to function. Yeah. Do you personally, I hear there's obviously varying opinions of eat every 2 hours or breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Where do you fall on that? Is again dependent on the person and their lifestyle, or probably what they could sustain, right?
Pretty dependent on the person. I mean, the intermittent fasting craze is cool in that I think it tells us that we don't necessarily need to eat every 45 minutes or you're going to be out of your anabolic state and lose your muscle mass. But at the same time, I've seen people go completely nuts on this. I wrote my first article on intermittent fasting in 2005. It went mainly into the CrossFit scene. And by 2006, I just so deeply regretted writing that thing. I was like, fuck. But it was like pissing into a pool. Like you will never get it back out. But you have these like type A over-the-top people who are like, well, if 16 hours of fasting is good, then 22
is better.
Yeah, is even better. And I would start getting these emails from folks who are male or female. I haven't had libido in 6 months. My hair is falling out and my training is retrograde. And it's like, well, tell me what you're doing. It's like, I eat one meal a day and I had 5 grams of carbs last month, but I do 6 CrossFit workouts a week and I do hot yoga on my days off, and it's like, oh my God, So fasting is a stress. Some of that is good. If you are a type B, calm computer programmer that hangs out at home a lot, probably doing a little intermittent fasting is good. If you're a police officer, firefighter, doing a little intermittent fasting can be good in that you aren't always going to have access to food. But when you can eat, you probably should eat because you are already, the allostatic load, the total stress load you're dealing with is already monumental. You have disordered sleep. You have hypervigilant environment. You don't need to add more to it. So like 3 meals and a snack for like police, military, fire is probably a good thing because there's all this other stuff going on.
They have enough variables.
Yeah.
What do you recommend for the jiu-jitsu players that listen? Because I played with intermittent fasting and the performance, class was okay. Open mat,
not so much.
Got a little rough. Or the Sunday 2-hour open mat.
Right.
Oof. You hit this place where like, well, I guess it's side control or mount bottom for me for the rest of the time that I choose to spend on the mat.
Right. Until I have the good sense to go home. Yeah.
And I no longer have coordination in my body, my brain. I believe I was at class this week. I couldn't tell you what we actually were covering, nor could I execute it in this moment. It didn't work for me. I actually stopped because it's just like, I recognized in myself like, fuck.
So what were you doing? Were you doing fasted training?
Yes. I would break the fast after the training.
Some people can pull it off. I think it's a bad idea, personally.
I cannot.
Yeah. I don't. I definitely eat a big breakfast. Like we train at noon.
Yeah.
I eat a huge breakfast. And then that way...
What does a Robb Wolf breakfast look like, by the way?
Anywhere from like 3/4 to a pound of meat, and then a little bit of fruit, maybe some nuts. Like I get a good whack of food. Yeah. And it's funny, I'm starting to get just a little bit hungry by the time class kicks in. Like I'm like, if I could eat, I would. But once I start doing some physical activity, things kind of fall into place. I do some element during the class. And when there's like previous situations, there weren't so many top of the food chain predators on the mat. And if it was a bunch of old beat up guys like me, I might not do any carbs during the roll, but most of the time now I go over and I bring some glucose tabs, and I'll do anywhere from like 10 to 20 grams of glucose per hour while I'm rolling, and that really gets me through that stuff.
I'm going to hide those from you, by the way.
I don't think you need to, because you murdered me plenty good already, so I don't think we need to do that.
I want no, not for my own pleasure. Well, let me take that back. 100% for my own pleasure, but I'll watch what happens. When
mainly just watching me poop myself. Okay,
yeah,
because that's the only way
Rob's going over the deep end. Yes.
If I soil myself, then people leave me alone.
It would be tough to get training partners if that's your MO.
Yeah.
No, I really, and actually for me, it was less physical. I felt the cognitive decline.
Yep.
I would sit there in the middle of an open mat and think to myself, do I actually know any
jiu-jitsu?
Any at all?
Yeah.
And then as soon as I started eating, I have what I call a 90-minute blah window. If I eat within 90 minutes of training, it's coming up.
Yep.
89 minutes, I'm sorry, whoever's my training partner, but I can get it in pretty good. And I asked that question about eating because oftentimes I have no variability in comparison to law enforcement or fire, that stuff. But sometimes I go longer stretches, sometimes I go shorter stretches, and the amount of information on both of those, some people say, you can't do that. Others say, do whatever you want to.
Right.
It was more a selfish question.
Yeah. No, and it's jiu-jitsu is very demanding, but also it depends a little bit on how you play your game.
Yep.
If you're a little bit more relaxed, John Frankly type deal, I think you could potentially do some fasted training. And I think John trains fasted a lot, but he has a very relaxed game.
And 20-some years of experience
and 20 years of experience in that game. Yeah, yeah. So if you're newer, if you are really on that kind of competition track, which I think you always want a relaxed game, but there's kind of a reality. If you're going to compete, you're going to be going against somebody about your size, about your weight, and both of you are going to be going as hard as you can. Like that's not when you do a really relaxed deal. It's physical attributes are going to matter then. So if you're in a track like that, then I think we're really fueling for optimum performance. And if you're having brain fade, you're not going to imprint the techniques that you did. Like people do all this kind of interesting stuff around learning. Like if they're taking a chemistry class or they're a computer programmer or whatever, people should be doing the same shit before jiu-jitsu, before learning all kinds of other physical skill-based stuff. They should be looking at it like a school learning
I had never
scenario.
thought about it like that. That makes total sense, though.
Because if you don't stick that stuff somewhere above your brainstem, it's gone.
Yeah.
You know, and this is why getting good sleep is helpful, and really being well fed. It doesn't send the stress to your body. If you are under too much stress, your body's like, fuck it. Like we just default back to whatever you had before. We're not laying down new memories. We're not putting in new, motor programs and whatnot. So if somebody's really keto adapted, they might be able to do some fasted training, but you've got to be smart about the way you do that because you would be less likely to get that brain fade. But then it's dodgy. Like I've seen it break enough people that I'm like, just fucking have breakfast, man. Just have breakfast. Just have a snack beforehand,
That is the best term that there is for it. The most descriptive. Break people.
Yeah.
And you see them, they're like, I'm just so happy and I feel so great. I'm like, dude, you're dying on the outside. I'm sure you're great on the inside, but you don't look like you're enjoying anything. They're like, nah, I'm having the best time of my life. I'm like, here's a pancake. Like, oh my God, where have you been my whole life? That's another one I guess I understood it to a degree for the competitive athletes, but sacrificing insane amounts of quality of life and experiences in the quest of intermittent fasting it seems backwards to me. Slightly.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not the word, but I guess the priorities are askew in my opinion on that. Like, can we find a balance?
The time restricted eating window could be really helpful for some people. Some people may be like, I'm not going to change anything about what I eat. But some people, if you say, okay, you can eat between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. and eat and drink whatever the hell you want to, and they're like, okay. And it ends up being a win for them comparatively. Like they probably should still improve the composition, but they're at least eating less than what they were before. Because at some point you get full and you just can't eat, and you've got this limited window. So I can see a limited window of time eating working for kind of calorie restriction. But man, I would say the higher your stress, the more you're training. And it's funny because you have people that are like, oh, the Spartan warriors only ate one meal and everything. It's like, oh, okay, maybe. But our world is so stressful. Like it is so potentially stressful. The volume of training, the athletic load, the hypervigilant state under different circumstances. And again, like if you have a really mellow life, you can get away with more of this stuff. But if you're kind of running and gunning and you've got a lot going on, you just can't add another thing. The benefit of exercise and fasting to some degree is the stress element of it. But just like anything, too much is too much. And it's pretty individual. And one of the dangerous things, when people first start intermittent fasting, they feel really good because their adrenals are kind of ramped up and they're kind of in that like
in the
almost
response
giddy
to the new
state.
stress.
Yeah, and then 2 weeks in, they just crater. And then they will double down. They'll try to intermittent fast even more to try to get back to that. And they're really on the path to bad places doing that.
What was the life expectancy of a Spartan warrior?
I don't know.
I mean, people make odd analogies. They only ate once. Yeah, but what if they only lived to 40?
Right.
Can we take into some other considerations absent their battle death? I mean, what are we talking about here?
Right.
We've evolved a little bit as a species.
Well,
I like to think.
would they only want to eat one time a day?
Yeah, that's actually a good question too. The gruel cart would only come by one time a day, or whatever it is. They were roasted spit of pig. I don't know what the hell Spartans were eating. My knowledge of Spartans come from the movie 300s, which I assume is a documentary. So I guess they didn't wear much, and they painted on their tortoiseshell abs. So
even when it was cold as fuck, yeah.
Where do you land on the amount of sleep that you need?
Get as much as you can without getting divorced or fired. Like sleep, I make the case possibly is important or more important than food. But for a lot of people, it's not the lever that they've got a ton of control over. Police, military, fire, medical, new parents, like they're just hosed in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of good mitigating strategies you can use, wearing blue blockers before you go to bed, using something like Doc Parsley's sleep remedy and stuff like that to help you just kind of wind down. But the sleep is critically important. And again, circling it back into like jiu-jitsu land or just learning anything, you have to sleep to be able to imprint new memories, to imprint new skills. So if you're trying to improve yourself in some capacity, whether it's playing a guitar or whatever, like the sleep part is critical.
Not to use names, but let's say there was somebody out there who wakes up around 4:25 a.m. to 4:35 a.m. and posts a picture of their watch, which inspires other people to do so, and they slowly start auguring in due to, I'm going to call a non-technical term, lack of sleep. I understand the motivation and discipline of that particular individual, and I'm assuming sleep is the requirements are different per person.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts on the just broad application of that to everybody's life?
So,
also, by the way, I love Jocko to death, and he knows damn well that I talk shit about him waking up at 4:30. So,
and it's funny within that SEAL community. What was like the defining selection process for you?
So Buds was the Crucible.
Yeah.
And the fifth week when I went through it may have moved around to the fourth or sixth. Starts on a Friday, ends on a Sunday. It's sleep deprivation, 2 hours essentially for the week, plus some micro naps that you don't. I can sleep standing up. I do know this coming from that. It was a very short period of time. I also woke up once in mid full frontal face free fall into the sand, but then also extreme, hypothermia, caloric deficiency. I don't know if I could say caloric deficiency because they really actually did make an emphasis to feed us every 6 hours.
Yeah, but
every other extreme was toyed with. For sure.
Yeah. So you've got this selection process that like there's been some neurochemistry peaks at folks who make it through the SEAL selection process. Neuropeptide Y tends to be like 600% higher than most other people. And it's this kind of adaptive brain hormone. So there's some different stuff going on there. And you really only ferret that out by really pressure cooking people and forcing them to reach the absolute ends of their capacities, Or
sometimes beyond what they thought was possible.
Right. Absolutely. But that selection process then gets woven into the culture of day-to-day living and training. And that was where some of the work that I did with Naval Special Warfare, it's like, you guys are hard as nails. That's awesome. But if you continue to train the way that you were selected, you're going to fucking die, or you're going to have shorter careers, or you're going to have all kinds of other problems. And it's interesting watching this progression. There is a little bit of variability in the sleep needs that folks have, but when they take people out of kind of urbanized environments, like literally they take them backpacking, like you go out in nature, there's no electronics around, there's no nothing. People sleep like 8 or 9 hours a night, and they do it like clockwork. Right as the sun goes down, people start getting tired, might have a campfire, but that doesn't keep you awake that long. You go to bed, you wake up a little bit before dawn. And so there's not actually as much variability in what sleep people will get if given the proper...
If left unchecked.
there is a pretty good variation in the amount of functionality that people can have with a given amount of sleep. And this also defaults back to training. So like surgeons and other folks that do somewhat repetitious skills like millions of times, these people are super sleep deprived, but they've done the process so much that they can literally do it almost asleep. But they're still impaired. Like just an hour or two of sleep deprivation over the course of a week, you are as impaired physically and cognitively as if you were like a 0.1 blood alcohol content. You don't notice that because the sleep deprivation kind of loads up over the week. And I'm stealing all this stuff from Doc Parsley. Like I really got all this stuff from him.
I love his Sleepy Time cocktail. I worked with him. He was actually the doctor that wouldn't sign my discharge physical.
Oh, funny.
Yeah, which in the end, I'm so thankful. But he gave me, now he has his, it's just a product, right? The full remedy.
Yeah.
Before it was buy these 5 things.
Yeah.
The first time I tried that stuff, I could barely get off the sofa.
Yeah.
Like, it's definitely bedtime. Yeah. I slept so hard I thought I had died.
Right. And so how old is Jocko now?
I don't know, actually. I don't want to say he's a generation before me, but he was in before me and got out before me. So I'd say he's got to be in his late 40s.
Late 40s. It starts adding up. Like when you're in your 20s, you can do the sleep deprivation thing pretty hard. In your 30s, you can catch up on weekends and stuff like that. You start hitting your late 40s, and it's you have to start putting back in the bank. Like it's kind of like a credit card.
Yeah, you got to put the equity in.
Yeah, you have to put the equity back in. And what's interesting is it's kind of layers. In your 20s, you can train hard. You could be a little bit sleep deprived, and you can get back and do it again. In your 30s, you can have similar level of performance, but you got to sleep. And then in your 40s, you want to hang on to every little bit of performance that you have, and you have to, I need to eat better. I need to sleep better. Like you start doing some midday meditations and stuff to kind of reset your clock and everything. Like you have to start really pulling more stuff in to keep that kind of youthful performance level if you want to have that.
Do you do midday meditations?
I do. And
I know nothing about this, but I'm curious.
It's kind of crazy. 3 years ago now, I guess, Nikki was poking around on some website, and she found this book, Stress Less, Accomplish More. This gal, Emily Fletcher, she got the book. She started reading it. She's like, this thing's amazing. I'm like, whatever, because I had tried meditation a lot. I tried a bunch of different things. I really like Sam Harris. I tried his app. It just nothing stuck. You know, it was just like, I don't feel like I'm getting anything out of this. And Nikki had me read just front and back of one page in Emily's book, and it laid out what to do. Like you do this, come into your senses, you know, think about what I'm smelling, what I'm tasting, what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing, how my body feels. And then I do this kind of mantra thing, which is just one, like I say one. And whenever any thought enters my mind, I just let it go. Like there's no attachment to it. I just let it go. Some days go really well. Other days it's, you know, like hamsters spinning in there. I do it for 15 minutes. I do it in the morning. I do it in the afternoon. And it has been as impactful on my life as like ancestral eating, you know, and I'm like the paleo guy. I mean, it, and I sound like I'm not selling the book, but I tell you, it is, particularly if you have any thought around improving performance or kind of like staying at the top of your game for as long as you possibly can physically and cognitively, there's beautiful science that paints meditation in this great light, you know, more gray matter, more synaptic activity. The brain seems to legitimately age at a slower rate. And if your brain ages slower, you age slower. So there's all this cool stuff. And Emily was she's not a scientist by training, but she covered the science in a really accessible and fun way. And then it was a super non-woo-woo, weird way of doing this. It was super practical. She's like, I don't teach people meditation to make them go sit on a mountain. It's to make their lives better. The one and only goal is not to become a good meditator. It's to make you good at life. And it just, the whole thing resonated with me. We shared all this stuff with our Healthy Rebellion community, and it just went like wildfire in there. People like and one of the biggest things that it improves is sleep quality. Interesting. Yeah, like people fell asleep earlier. Didn't have interrupted sleep, slept a little bit longer, woke up more rested. Like and we've also had people track their HRV and stuff like that, so they kind of get their kind of readiness, and it improved it dramatically. So yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to check that out then. I tell you what has actually been one of the larger game changers for me, and I have no understanding of why this is the case, but it's actually the Element stuff sitting in between us. They sponsored the episode last week.
Okay.
But it's interesting. I'll do experiments with myself at a non-scientific level because I'm a retard. But the difference when I will train hard and then immediately follow it with, I used to go one packet for just a little small bottle of water. Now I pour half in, chug that, fill it up again, another half, chug it. I can almost, I'm sure this is impossible, but I can almost feel like I don't want to say energy, but I can feel it spreading. Like my body is getting what it needs, and I can feel it.
It's got what plants crave. Yeah.
I can feel it expanding throughout my body, and it actually is helping with my sleep. It changed my appetite a little bit. And from I mean, again, you're the expert on this, not me. It's an electrolyte. I don't know necessarily what electrolytes do. I've always heard that athletes need them. Well, one of my favorite things about it is that if you take too much, it's self-critiquing and you just shit your brains out. Like, okay, that is maximum dosage. I don't need to worry. Because, I mean, it's salt. A lot of it is salt. But that's been a huge game changer. And then actually, by having a little bit in my water, too, it helps me stay out on the mats longer.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why or what's going on there.
I mean, it's clearly beneficial for me to paint it in a favorable light. I'm one of the co-founders of the company, but when you look at our physiology, maybe the most tightly regulated thing is pH levels. Like if pH goes up or down a little bit, you're dead, and you'll feel terrible along the way.
Which one is more dangerous, up or down?
Either way will get you.
Really?
I mean, either way, like if somebody starts vomiting and they lose a lot of acid out of their body, they can become alkalotic, and that'll kill you just as well as acidotic. So yeah, it's bad either way. It's just very, very tightly regulated, and because all of our enzymes function within really tight pH ranges. I could be wrong on this, but I've been noodling on this, but the next most tightly regulated thing is electrolyte status. Like every thought we have, every muscle impulse is driven by sodium-potassium pumps and the ratio of sodium-potassium outside of our cell relative to inside our cell. And so it's not part of the reason why Element has done so well is that if you are deficient in sodium in particular, electrolytes in general, but sodium in particular, if you take a snort of pickle juice, like 5 minutes later, you're like, oh my God, I feel way better. Like if that 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when normally you would want like another double espresso or something like that, you do chicken bouillon, you do pickle juice, or you do something like an Element. If the sodium deficiency was really what was driving the brain fatigue and the lethargy, you feel it within like 5 minutes, and you literally feel much better. And it was just kind of a cool paper. I mean, it was great timing, but it looked at really aggressive sodium supplementation post-workout, and it really enhances recovery. Like it's driving all the sodium-potassium pumps. It tends to help bring the adrenal activity back down to normal, so it takes you out of that warp drive to get you back into the restorative stage. The sleep, we've seen the same deal there. If people are deficient in sodium, their adrenals will kind of ramp up in the evening instead of dial down. A good friend of mine, Chris Masterjohn, and he is the smartest dude in the room. Like, doesn't matter what room it is, he's the smartest guy. He made a recommendation of like a quarter to a half teaspoon, which is about a half gram to a gram of salt before bed. Just tiny little bit of water, shoot it down if you're having problems waking up in the middle of the night. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and that has been miraculous for people. Yeah.
It changes. My body feels different soreness-wise. And again, it's weird to describe. Like, it kind of feel like it coursing through your veins, but that is what it feels like when I'm in those moments after. My gi isn't dry after the end of a 2-hour block of 1 hour of instruction, an hour of open mat. Yeah, it's basically the container of water is a single serving. It's just
yeah. And it's been interesting for me because I stumbled onto this working with my friends Tyler Cartwright and Luis Villasenor. They're the founders of this group called Keto Gains, and they have like a couple of 100,000 people online that they help move through these kind of keto related resets. but they were really on point with the sodium. Like they really understood the necessity on that. And some people in their community, they're doing 10 grams of sodium a day total, like from all sources. And the American Medical Association guidelines recommend less than 2 grams of sodium per day, but it's super dubious when you look at the health specs. One thing you just do is look across the Pacific at Japan, and they eat 10 to 15 grams of sodium a day, and they have less hypertension and cardiovascular disease than we do. So it's really dubious on the health side why we ended up doing that. But I got absolutely mauled yesterday at jiu-jitsu. You were the appetizer. You were the appetizer on that, and then there were many a main course afterwards. And normally I would be almost drooling on myself, so sore, like just, and it's almost like I drink my way out of that with the electrolytes. Like if I'm still feeling a little off, I'll drink a little bit more, still feeling a little off. And like I lifted some weights today and did the rest of my stuff. And normally I would never be able to do that. And I am not getting younger. Like it's so this is such a fascinating contrast with my training now versus what it was like 4 years ago. Like I wasn't aggressively supplementing electrolytes, and like I would cramp during rolling. I get the toe cramps, sometimes some calf cramps and everything. And then my recovery just sucked. Like it took a long time to recover. And I am eating lower carb. Like if I had more carbs, it might be better, but then I really don't do that well with the carbs. I have GI issues and all kinds of stuff. So this is just kind of where I have to be. It's not the optimum for doing the sport that I'm doing, but I've figured out how to make all that stuff work pretty effectively.
Do you salt your food in addition?
I do. Yeah, pretty aggressively. Yeah.
What's your governor on that? When it gets too salty, you feel like you've had enough?
Yeah. And
doctors are just like, no, Robb Wolf, you can't do that.
Well, not to get it out into too geeky of realms, but there was an interesting study looking at sodium intake in type 2 diabetic heart patients. So people that you would assume that sodium limitation would be beneficial, and a U-curve emerged where at very low intake of sodium, morbidity and mortality was high, like death and illness was high. Once people hit about 5 grams of sodium intake per day was the low ebb of morbidity and mortality. And then as they increased sodium intake, it went up, but it was a flatter curve on the more side. So you had to get out to 8 to 10 grams of sodium per day to have the same morbidity and mortality as you did at 2 grams per day.
Oh, interesting.
And that 5 gram level seems to be a pretty good like bottom floor for most people to operate in. And then interestingly, even within more like orthodox missionary style guidelines like the American Council of Sports Medicine, they have guidelines that for active individuals, high work output, heat, humidity, they're 7 to 10 grams per day of sodium. And we've done some work with like some NHL teams, and they do some really interesting stuff where they put sweat pads on people and see how much sodium they're losing. Some of these bigger guys are losing 10 grams of sodium in a game, like 10 pounds of water, 10 grams of sodium.
That's crazy.
It's insane. And these are kind of the super sweaters. They clear a lot of sodium. They dump a lot of water. Not everybody does that, but it shows you that there's this remarkable spectrum there. And if these guys were following the standard dietary guidelines, like they would be a cramp. They would probably have like a cardiac cramp, have a heart attack from it. Yeah.
Are there legitimately people that just sweat more than others?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's massive variation on like any given work output, any given like temperature and humidity, person A versus person B. Like there can be like an 80% difference in the amount of sweat that they're losing. Yeah, it's pretty remarkable.
Is that just an efficiency difference in their body, or it's just the way that they are?
I don't know for sure. It's interesting. Like women are technically more efficient at sweating.
They glisten.
They glisten. They literally do, and it actually is better for evaporative cooling. Whereas like if sweat, it takes energy to produce sweat. And so what you really want it to do is to evaporate because it's removing heat off your body. It's cooling you. If it just drips off you, it's not cooling you. And all that you did was spend the energy to make it, and you lost the water and you lost the sodium and all that. So women are definitely more efficient at sweating. Like they're better evaporative coolers, and there's some thought about like protecting the developing fetus. Potentially they need more buffer on that, but I don't know then, how much variation there is within a population, the way that people sweat. But there definitely is a production difference there. Yeah.
Does it have anything to do with how good of shape that you're in, or it's just the way that your body functions? Like if you're in great shape, you
tend to sweat more and quicker. Like it will ramp up quicker and be more pronounced. Yeah. Yeah.
I like that. I find I sweat a lot. Probably not because I'm in good shape, though. We have to, I'll get you out of here pretty soon because I got to have dinner with my son. And you live locally now, so we can have
We can do more of these, yeah.
But we have to give the people what they need. What they need is your favorite drink recipe with element salt.
Recipe.
Because they have other versions of this that are spicy, and I'm going to throw a warning label on those. Do not open the container near your face.
No, or just in a closed area.
Because if you've never experienced tear gas, that's basically what it feels like. And I know that because I made the mistake of doing that once, and I thought I was going to die.
Yes.
The cocktail I made was delightful. However, the experience for 5 minutes with that powder up my nose.
So the lemon habanero and the mango chili both make amazing drink bases, as does just the citrus. That's a tough one. Like the mango chili, I would say. So maybe a shot or two of tequila, mango chili, and then just a little bit of bubbly water on top of that, a little bit of ice. And if you want to sweeten it up even a little bit more, a little bit of stevia, which I oftentimes do.
People don't believe how good it is.
It's shockingly good. Well, and when we first came out with this company, we formulated the flavors so that if it failed as an electrolyte company, we were going to pivot and just be a drink-based company.
I like where your head's
now
at.
we can kind of do both. Yeah.
It's dangerous, though, people. When we're saying create a cocktail, this is no longer for the health benefit.
No,
I'm sure that you could get electrolytes from it, but I think if you had like 10 or 15, you might be on the old potty.
Yeah, yeah.
Your wife made one when she came up for ladies' camp.
Yeah.
We were at a restaurant. She brought her own, of course. The spicy ones, they weren't even out yet. I was like, oh, you son of a bitch. Made a tequila drink. I'm not a huge tequila fan. I'll participate when the time is right, or maybe you're at a Mexican food restaurant. She made it. It was delightful. It was actually shocking how good it was. Because I guess what I'm not a fan of is the taste of just the raw tequila alone itself. Right. But it was damn good.
Yeah, and the chocolate salt in coffee with a little bit of whole cream.
I haven't tried that yet.
It's really good. It's really good.
Whole packet or half?
Okay. I do a whole packet, but my cup of coffee is a tankard. So, I mean, it's probably 20 ounces. So,
it's a redneck guzzler. It's no big deal.
Yep. Yeah.
I like it. I like it a lot. How's the family like in the Valley?
They love it. Like both girls independently, and it happened within 24 hours. Both girls independently said, Dad, this feels more like home than anywhere we've been. And then Nikki, completely independent, she said, this feels more like being home than even where I grew up. So I was like, finally, because my family fucking hated me when I took them to Texas. Like, we liked a lot of elements of Texas, and the cool thing about doing that, we met some amazing people. Like, we made some lifelong friends. We helped to get that gym up and going, and they're just crushing it. They're doing an amazing job there. But it just it never quite felt like home. So it's
hard to describe until you felt that, and then you land somewhere. And that was the same thing for me, is the way I described it as well.
I remember it was a good long while ago, but you mentioned moving here, and you're like, I'm never living anywhere else again. and there was this, you don't make many emphatic statements, but there was this like,
I was pretty sure about that one.
You were real sure about that. You're like, I'm never moving anywhere again. I'm never living anywhere else again. And it stuck in my head. And it is good that we went to Texas, because we met some really amazing people and made some great connections.
It's a good compare and contrast as well.
Yeah, because I would have always wondered had we not gone there, because I was curious about it.
I've heard the seasons are relatively the same.
They are. It tends to be hot, and the funny thing is, we lived in like the best part of Texas. Like, it does have a little bit of seasonal change. It's not crushingly humid compared to a lot of other areas. The hill country is cool, and like for somebody, young family, they're just getting going, they want a lot of different employment opportunities. Like, that is an amazing place. There's so much cool stuff going on. There's lots of good people. If you were just kind of getting your life going, like, I could see the Texas Hill Country, like anywhere between San Antonio and Austin, would be an amazing place to go. Yeah.
I've enjoyed my visits there.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do the summer times.
Yeah. Yeah.
It when you can burn yourself on just concrete alone by walking
Right.
without footwear, that to me is going to be a hard pass.
Yeah. We just lived in our pool. Like, we literally
you
almost
not?
did not get out of our pool.
How
Yeah.
could you not? What was I'm assuming it was unheated. What was the temperature of the water in that pool?
It didn't get. We were lucky in that we had enough oak trees in the backyard that it was pretty shaded, and so it was always comfortable and enjoyable, even in the summer. Whereas other folks had a fully exposed pool, and you're just like, I don't even want to go in there. You know,
Why would it's a larger bathtub?
Yeah.
Well, this will be the first of many, I have no doubt. I want to bring you in on some Friday episodes if you're game to answer just specific questions people have.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Because when people ask me for a dietary bias, I'm just like, I'll just put that one off to the side because I don't know. I'm an idiot when it comes to that. But the best way for people to find you?
RobbWolf.com. Probably the best place to track me down. I do a lot of writing over at Element, and that's drinkelement.com.
Which, by the way, is LMNT.
Yeah.
And I love it when I see people, they're like, can I get some more of that LMNT? I'm like, hey, man, you can just say Element too. And they look at it and they're like, son of a bitch.
Naming a product is tough.
It is, but it's good. And the branding is good. It's stay salty.
I almost brought you a hat,
it.
but I figured you need another hat and T-shirt. Like, I need another hat and T-shirt. So
the struggle is real. The donation bag gets made like every quarter. I make a donation to the Goodwill, and honestly, some of the times it's like my own stuff. Like, I just had these shirts made, and I'll open the bag and wear them myself, and then I can't find one. I'm like, well, there's more in the garage, and the next thing I'm like, I got 8 of these in my drawer. We need to donate.
Thin this out. Yeah.
Well, cool, man. Thank you for taking the time. I'll let you get back to the fam. I'm going to go have some dinner and, head to the comp tomorrow, but I'll be back on the mats I probably won't see you Monday. We'll probably have to battle again on Wednesday.
Okay, great. I'll probably have a groin strain that day or something.
Perfect. Thanks, Rob. Thank you again to ExpressVPN for supporting this episode of the podcast. Turns out that even in incognito mode, your online activity still gets tracked. If you really want to go incognito and protect your privacy, then secure yourself with the #1 rated VPN. Protect yourself at expressvpn.com/clearedhot to learn more and get 3 extra months free.
Understand the west bank of the river? That's A firm, west bank, and give me hell. Still give it to me in the grove. Okay, one's in from the north. I've got the west bank of the river. Two's going to give it to you in the grove. Roger, give me that gun run. Right along that bag, baby.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Thanks for taking the time to tune in, whether you're listening on an audio-only platform or you're watching on YouTube. I appreciate that you take the time every week to tune in. People ask me a lot, what can they do to help me spread the word? And the answer is actually embedded in the question. The biggest thing you guys can do to help me, if you enjoy the podcast and you think it would be helpful to others, is subscribe and share it with other people. And if you have the time, go on to Apple Podcasts and leave me a rating and a review. If you think the podcast sucks, tell me it sucks and leave a 0-star review or the lowest stars possible. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion, you can go to clearedhotpodcast.com. And there is a contact me button right there, which will land in my inbox. And the last thing, if people are interested in helping out, what you can do is fly the old flag. And by that, I don't mean an actual flag, because I don't have any of those. I'm talking about T-shirts or sweatshirts or hats, whatever it may be. Again, clearedhotpodcast.com. Click on the shop tab, and hopefully something in there looks like it would be an item you would like to wear around town. And then you can tell people what it is when they ask you. But that is it. The biggest thing I can say is thank you. I truly appreciate it. And until next time, see you.